French and Friends, WCGO. Let's talk health. Let's talk smoking. Are we doing better as a people? Have the policies that have been implemented over the last many years curbed smoking? What about smokeless tobacco? What about vaping? What about taxes? All of those things. Our guest is Scott Ballin, health policy consultant. He was with the American Heart Association for 25 years, so he knows these issues intimately. Scott, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Okay, well, let's start with vaping, if we may. My compatriot here, Dennis Sonar Green, he is called Sonar for a good reason. He was with the Navy for a number of years. I see that the Navy has just banned vaping on ships. First, let's just take that. I mean, what's the rationale behind not being able to vape some places? It's a heck of a lot better than smoking cigarettes, isn't it? Or
well,
is it?
It is, and most people would agree that e-cigarettes are about 90 to 95% lower in risk than a cigarette.
Yeah.
I guess that when you're on a confined space in a ship and they still haven't decided what the total effects are on vaping, that it's probably a better thing to do at this moment to not allow it. However, there are a lot of people who probably are still in the Navy who smoke cigarettes, don't smoke on board, but vaping may be a good alternative to them when they're off the vessel. Because they are significantly lower in risk, you get the same levels of nicotine, and you're going to feel a lot better.
What do you attribute some of the pushback against vaping? I mean, obviously, it's a superior alternative to just smoking cigarettes. Now, I do understand, municipalities, cities not wanting people to vape indoors. But on the whole, are there any health risks that we know of that are stark and true, or is this still under testing by the FDA to figure out where we are with that?
Well, it's both. Everybody will agree that e-cigarettes are far more less hazardous than cigarettes. No question about it. There are a lot of different types of e-cigarettes out there. You've got closed systems. You've got those that you mix your own mixture of flavors, etc. And so we need to figure all this out and figure out what the best regulatory environment and system is for making sure these products are what they say. That does not mean that they're not safer than cigarettes. They are. There's no question about it.
Okay.
But no product that we use in society is safe. Look at our foods. We eat high-fat food, cholesterol, salt, everything. And what we're trying to do and suggest to people is that it's the deadly cigarette. When you light something on fire and suck it into your lungs, it's the toxins in that smoke that causes all the damage. Yeah. If we can get people off that and onto using products like e-cigarettes or smokeless products like Swedish snus, which is a good form of delivery of nicotine. People think of smokeless tobacco these days, still in the old frame of chewing tobacco. These are superior products that are scientifically developed, and the toxins have been removed. So you're getting a cleaner dose of nicotine when you use those. Same with vaping. We've got a ways to go on some of this stuff, but I get concerned when people overreact that vaping is going to be hook the next generation of children. I just don't buy that. We have an agency, an FDA, that should be monitoring what's going on out there. And I think most of the companies I've talked to in the vaping area, they don't want kids to use these products either. But they do want to provide adults who are smoking in particular with these safer alternatives. And I think we have an obligation and responsibility to do that.
Well, absolutely. Mr. Ballin, almost according to the FDA, vaping is almost worse for you. Why do you think there's such this pushback towards actually this alternative?
Well, I've been in this area for a long, long time, and, we've always had this big anti-industry sort of approach to things, which was needed because the tobacco industry duped the American public, caused millions and millions of deaths prematurely, and a lot of people I know in public health, including myself, sometimes have a feeling that we have to make sure we don't go down that road again. So we want to make sure that these products are, in fact, safer. But I think the FDA has gone overboard on this. They're trying to treat it more like a cigarette than looking at it as a new, novel, alternative product that's lower in risk. And they're having, a lot of people in public health are having a real difficult time dealing with new products that actually are technologically superior to the cigarette. time, I hope, will change that environment to the point where we will be telling the public, and particularly smokers, the relative risks of these products. They have a right to know. I know a lot of people who smoke who say, well, why would I want to switch to that? I hear it's more dangerous. We need to be giving people truthful and accurate information about these products and helping them get off the deadly cigarette. That's where the problem is.
Well, Mr. Ballin, if it's so bad for us, why isn't it banned? Why the FDA bans all kinds of substances that we shouldn't be putting into our body? Why isn't it on the blacklist?
Yeah, the cigarette, when we finally got legislation enacted to cover the tobacco industry, this may sound strange, but the compromises that were made actually protected the cigarette business.
Wow.
Which is kind of crazy because that's what's making it very difficult to get these new products out there. Some people are, what's going on is people are wanting to regulate e-cigarettes more than they do cigarettes.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. We want to remove the cigarette market. But in order to do that, when you've got millions of addicted smokers out there, you've got to give them alternatives that are lower in risk and to provide services to help wean them off of the combustible products like cigarettes or cigars.
Yeah, Scott, something interesting that kind of just popped into my mind when I hear you talking about that. It seems like it's one of those old political things. The big companies, they can lobby, and whether Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. It just depending on the issue and who's in power will determine who the majority of the phone calls go to. I kind of think about the American Health Care Act, or was it the Affordable Health Care Act? That was supposed to protect the consumer and the patient or those to be insured, but ultimately what we got was something that seems to have benefited the companies, and I guess that's the same way with tobacco. Who is lobbied? But I guess that's another issue entirely.
It's interesting you say all that, and because I agree. But what has also happened today?
Yes, sir.
When FDA got authority over tobacco products, the big companies weren't in the business of producing lower risk products. Today, Altria, Reynolds, and all the other companies are now producing e-cigarettes as well, and they're producing these non-combustible lower risk products as well. They've become a changed industry. A lot of industries morph into to adapt to the future, and because of the FDA authority over them and regulating them, they're looking at new options where they can make money, but at the same time potentially provide products to adult consumers of cigarettes that will, again, help wean them off those deadly products.
Well, that is encouraging. Scott D. Ballin joins us, health policy consultant. He spent 25 years with the American Heart Association, delving deep into issues such as this. Dennis?
We're starting to see a rise of marijuana cigarettes right now, Mr. Ballin. Do you think that this is almost a precursor? If they can figure out how to regulate vaping, maybe they can use that same model when marijuana almost inevitably will be legalized.
Well, you're absolutely right. This is something that we're going to have to deal with as a society. I testified before Congress probably 3 years ago, and jokingly said, when I was talking about tobacco issues, I said, we're going to be facing the same challenges with respect to marijuana. Now, like e-cigarettes and vaping, that could have a health benefit. People use nicotine for various reasons. And marijuana is also used for medical purposes, but it's also used for recreational purposes. We're going to be having to challenge and figure out what to do with marijuana in the coming years, both on the federal level as well as on the state and local level. So the parallels are there. There's no question.
It's coming for sure everywhere. Just here in Illinois, since we can't seem to agree upon a budget, one of the things I've seen both parties introduce is legalized marijuana for recreational use. I think we'll have it here sooner or later, and we have been one of the more strict states in the union on regulating marijuana for medical purposes. This is all very fascinating to me. One of the things I've noticed, this is actually a twofold issue, I suppose. Somebody I know smokes 555s. That's the old British company, okay? I'm sure you've heard of them. And it certainly seems to me these are coming from Vietnam because the packaging is Vietnamese. So issue one is smuggling. Okay, let's just start with that. I'm assuming this has just exploded considering the cigarettes are between $11 and $13 a pack in Chicago. Is this a nationwide crisis?
Well, it's not just a nationwide crisis. It's a global crisis.
I suppose, yeah. I said Vietnamese. You're right, sure.
It promotes, illegal crime and a lot of people getting rich off it. And it's hard to crack down on it because you don't have the the enforcement mechanisms in place. I've been talking to a lot of people in public health about this as a problem, and companies. Legitimate companies don't like it either because, one, it gives them a bad name, and two, it cuts into their business. And I think this is another big area where whenever there's a place to make money, people are going to find that niche. And cigarettes are cheap to make. You can make them anywhere in the world with just get a machine and pump them out, package them to make them look like something else, counterfeit cigarettes, and ship them anywhere in the world you want. And that's a real problem that's going to have to be dealt with.
Well, to keep it on the same level of money, where are our tax dollars that with this hike in price? Where are the tax dollars actually going? Because I think a lot of states are using this to boost their own their own budget as opposed to actually funneling it into healthcare like they should be.
Yeah, that's a problem, and you also have the problems as you mentioned before because across state borders, there's a lot more smuggling going on when one state has a lower tax than another, and that creates a real significant problem in smuggling. The other thing that we have talked about in public health is, and you just mentioned it, the whole purpose of raising the excise tax on tobacco products was to funnel that money back into public health and tobacco control programs and activities. But it's going into all kinds of things to deal with the state budgets. And there's a big discussion now going on about whether e-cigarettes should be taxed at the same level as cigarettes. And many of us in public health say no. These should be taxed at a lower rate, so it would be an incentive for smokers who are costing this country billions of dollars in lost productivity and healthcare costs to switch to something that's much riskier and to be able to pay for it. So that's another debate that's going on, even within the public health community.
Scott Ballin joins us, health policy consultant. We're talking about smoking, and also we can talk a little non-smoking, too. I am fascinated by all of this. I can't believe I have so many more questions for you, but I do. French and Friends, more coming up. More French and Friends. We're talking about smoking. We're talking about smokeless tobacco. We're talking about smuggling, taxes. All of these things are incredibly important issues. I mean, a lot of it is about the kids, but it's also about many other sectors of our populace. Scott, in the last segment, we were talking about smuggling. We were talking about excise taxes. Let's take Cook County here, where we are today. As I mentioned, $11 to $13 a pack. If I'm a guy who's making $100,000, $150,000, doing well, I can afford those. Or I can afford to take a trip up to Lake County, just to our north. Or I can take a trip into Indiana where I can get my cigarettes for half the price. If I'm a poor fellow or a poor woman in Chicago, I'm riding the bus. I'm probably not getting out of Cook County too often. If I've got that cigarette addiction, it's really going to hurt my wallet more than it will other people. Are we seeing poor people affected more so than the wealthy by these high taxes in the cities?
Yeah, I think that's a typical reaction between economic status. Clearly, but there's another problem to this, in that there are a lot of poor people who actually are continuing to buy cigarettes because they're addicted.
Yeah,
and that's part of the problem as well. And that's also gets into this whole smuggling issue, because that's a market. If you're in a low economic environment.
Sure.
And someone brings in counterfeit cigarettes that may be much worse than the other ones you're smoking because they're cheaper. That's not good for anyone except the one on the receiving end, the one who's making them and profiting at it. So all of these issues are overlapping. They're complex, and I think as a society we need to be looking at developing policies and strategies that are going to reduce disease and death. Even if we do have tobacco-related products such as smokeless products out there, such as e-cigarettes, which have nicotine. All the nicotine comes from tobacco. It's derived from tobacco, and there's a myth that nicotine causes cancer. It's not the nicotine that kills you; it's the toxins in the products, and in particularly the smoke that kills you. And again, caffeine is used by people in all different forms. Nicotine is a similar type of drug. It does have risks, but they're not significant risk compared to the products like cigarettes that are out there. So we need to think through these things better as a society, how these products are taxed, how we can help the poor. For example, the African American communities, there's a high percentage of African Americans who smoke menthol products.
Yeah.
Why, we should be encouraging the development of e-cigarettes that are lower in risk, but provide that menthol taste that they like. So there are all kinds of things from a marketing side, from a public health side, that we need to start talking about much more honestly than just making this a black and white issue.
Sure. I'm sorry, Dennis. I was for both of you, I was in Walgreens last week, and a fella came in, an African-American man. He said, they don't sell these in my neighborhood anymore. So he said, I came over here. You guys have menthol. Yeah, well, he's still getting them.
Yeah, Mr. Ballin, is that a solution that we can have other than, I guess, legislation going after some of these companies? Is it more of a social construct? Or are we trying to make it to where it's not accessible to people? What are the steps that we can take as, I guess, just as citizens to try to turn this epidemic around?
Well, I think it's going to require some kinds of regulations and policies in place from the federal level all the way down to the state and local. But again, there's got to be a better education process within, let's say, the low economic communities about what these products are and what they're not. Traditionally, public health organizations such as the ones I have worked for, they have their programs and their activities, but the environment has changed so much with the types of products that are out there. And also trying to reach people in different ways that we, can't do in certain communities, but can do, with social media things in other communities. We've got to think these things through. They're just not implementing policies to say everybody has to do X, Y, and Z. I think there needs to be some creativity on the part of some of the leaders in these communities to find ways to better improve the health of the people who live there.
Scott Ballin is our guest, health policy consultant. We're talking about tobacco products, and it's really amazing to me how fascinating some of this stuff is. I mentioned to you this guy I know who is apparently getting black market Vietnamese cigarettes. Okay, a lot of these are fake. Scott was telling us, people, you don't know what you're buying necessarily. You're paying that cheap price for a reason. One, it's illegal, and you might not even be smoking or taking whatever you think it is. One thing I did notice on the package of this guy's cigarettes is an old man clutching his chest in one of the more grisly pictures I've ever seen directly on the package of these cigarettes. Why don't we have such horrific images on our packages of cigarettes, our packs of cigarettes in this country?
Well, Congress was not able to get those packages approved. They were going to put more graphic warnings on, but in this country, because of the First Amendment and the boundaries between too much excessive information or scary information that may not be completely truthful, it's a First Amendment issue, and it was sent back to the FDA for review, and they're supposedly working on a solution so that the First Amendment challenges to the graphic labels can be resolved. That's been going on for 3-4 years now. But,
yeah. Whatever happened to the money? I think of Mississippi. I can't remember the name. Was it Dickie Scruggs or somebody? Was that him down in Mississippi who spearheaded this thing? I remember in Mississippi and maybe like a couple other states, this was all supposed to go toward education, right? Not education, I'm sorry. Smoking cessation programs, and then maybe to a lesser extent education. I hear the whereabouts where that money ended up is anybody's guess. Has this thing just been completely used and abused?
Well, it depends on the states, but you're right. There was a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars, and it's still out there. But again, what has happened is the states, instead of doing what the money was intended to do, they're building prisons, they're fixing roads and bridges, and helping out the schools. There are lots of projects, and so a lot of that money that was intended to be funneled into public health, and particularly tobacco control programs, is not getting there. And that is a problem, but again, fixing that is difficult. The states are so desperate for money to balance their budgets, and cities as well. And so that money is easy to allocate. It comes from big tobacco, and no one really cares about that. They're happy about it, but they're also very willing to spend it.
Essentially, what you're saying, Mr. Ballin, is that this vaping is a safer alternative, not completely unharmless. But what about the flavors and the other chemicals that have been put into these things? Are they being regulated as well, just like the, I guess, the fire-safe wrappers and everything else for cigarettes? Are we starting to get more of a chemical type of regulation for these?
Yeah, that's what's going to happen. And my concern has been that the FDA got a late start in all this. And this became a national issue, national crisis, before they've had a chance to sort through stuff. Yes, we do need standards and regulations. For example, in the food area, the FDA reviews all flavors to make sure they're generally recognized and safe before they're put in any of our foods. And we've got all kinds of flavors in foods. That needs to happen with respect to e-cigarettes. There are a lot of flavors out there. We don't know what the ramifications are, but I think that the FDA could develop a list quite quickly, working with industry and working with other research labs to determine which of these flavors are okay. Again, they're not being burned. They're being mixed in a water vapor that goes into, that you suck on. So there are very big differences between cigarettes, obviously, that used to be flavored, and flavors are banned in cigarettes except for menthol. And so we've got some work to do. But what I'm concerned about is there's also this knee-jerk reaction of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that all this hype about e-cigarettes, including exploding batteries, et cetera, so a couple of them happen. Actually, FDA is having a workshop this week to talk about setting standards for batteries, which is right. I mean, our cell phones have it, lots of things we use in society. And we've had problems with cell phones, too.
Sure.
They don't ban all the cell phones in the world and take them off the market. What they do is they focus on a particular brand or product. And we need to start doing that with e-cigarettes and not looking at this as a sort of a tobacco industry plot to get kids addicted and addict the whole new society on nicotine.
Scott Ballin is our guest, health policy consultant. French and Friends, more coming up. Scott Ballin joins us, health policy consultant. We're talking about smoking. I know this isn't necessarily your field of expertise, perhaps, but I do feel that it's in the same field of play. You mentioned earlier on when we were talking about how the tobacco industry really fooled us. So we all remember the commercials, or at least have heard them, kind of as a throwback to a more deceitful time. Cigarettes are good for you.
Doctor recommended.
Yeah, recommends Winston. And I can't help but see a parallel with opioids in this country. Opioids were going to, and painkillers, they're going to be this great thing for people, and now we have an absolute opioid epidemic. Truth in advertising, is that really the big the big enemy we have, whether it be opiates, whether it be tobacco?
Well, I think it's part of it, because anybody who makes any kind of, I don't care whether it's a pharmaceutical company or a food company, they're in the business to make money.
Right.
Even though, sometimes we're supposed to look at the pharmaceutical industry as producing products that are supposed to make us healthier, et cetera. But they're still in the business of doing things. And I think that when these things kind of happen and it's become a national, state, and local issue, that we need to reassess how we're approaching these products. And Congress is beginning to do that. But again, we let the horse out of the barn. And we should be trying to figure out things in advance. When I said about marijuana earlier, I predicted that something was going to happen, and in a joking manner. But here it is on us, and we don't do enough thinking ahead of time about how to resolve some of these problems. And I think we need to be doing a better job of that. It's the same thing with smokeless tobacco products. We've known for 17 years that those products were 95% lower in risk than cigarettes. 95% lower in risk. But no one's been able to tell anybody that because of the FDA laws and regulations. They're not allowed to, which is kind of crazy. It seems like a reverse First Amendment problem. So we need to think these things through, whether it's opioids, whether it's marijuana, whether it's cigarettes or e-cigarettes, and develop policies that are actually going to work for us as a society.
Scott, question on the dips and the chews. When I was growing up in Georgia, I would occasionally in the summer have a chew, and I am telling you, I loved it, but I'm so grateful that it wasn't something that I got into regularly. You know, I will still have one every year, once or twice a year I'll have a chew, and I'm so thankful I'm not addicted. But here in Chicago, I don't even recognize it on the shelves. I'm going to Wrigley Field Wednesday. If a player were caught dipping, he'd be fined. Anybody in the stands, you know, they've gotten rid of that. Are we doing okay in curbing smokeless, chewable kind of tobaccos, dips, and the traditional chewing tobacco? I don't see it much here. I see it all over the place in the South still.
Yeah, we're making progress, but what I said earlier is that today's smokeless products are very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're somewhere in between the old products and the nicotine products that are made by pharmaceutical companies, the patches and gums that people use. The new products today, for example, Swedish Match makes a product that you put in between your cheek. It comes in a little pouch. There's no spitting. There's no that. When you're finished with it, you throw it in the trash can.
Huh.
It's clean, delivery of nicotine. It's not like the old stuff. And a lot of the old stuff, quite frankly, that's still out there, but not very much, has high levels of cancer-causing agents called nitrosamines. But the technology today allows manufacturers working with farmers to remove those toxins to make these products, as I said, 95% lower in risk than a cigarette. We need to be promoting that more and trying to discourage the old dips and chews and spit tobacco type stuff. So I'm all for that. But I always do, as a public health person, when people say, well, it's a bad image for kids to see ball players using this stuff, but you go to a ballpark, and what do you see all over the place is alcohol.
Sure, of course.
Beer, everywhere. That's not a good image for kids either. But I have not heard anybody say a word about that, yet they're very focused on this, some ball player has a piece of chewing tobacco in his mouth.
I live right up the street for a WIT. By all appearances, it appears to be a hangout for an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and I'm all for those people getting help. But I see, and I know that because I have someone that works here in the building who tells me all the ins and outs of AA, and they say the most abused thing, he says like 7 out of 10 people must be smokers. I really think there is a correlation between abuse of anything, and that includes tobacco. It can ruin lives just like alcohol can ruin lives. And I think that we've kind of given smokers a pass a little bit. Not that I want to persecute these people, but I think you are right. Alcohol, I should say, is the one that's been given a pass socially. So it's all very fascinating stuff. What do you recommend for those who are trying to or would like to and have never been able to really kick this smoking or tobacco habit? What have you seen in all of your years as a public health professional? What have you seen that has worked best and can maybe set somebody on the road to better health?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that because what I have found is it really depends on the person.
Okay.
How determined they are to quit. There are a lot of people who go cold turkey, but there are a lot of people, the majority in today's environment, in my view, who are willing to spend that $13 for cigarettes, who are really addicted. And expecting them to go cold turkey, it's just not going to happen. And so we can either help them through cessation programs, but that is why this whole notion of giving them lower risk, significantly lower risk products that contain the amount of nicotine that they need is a way to consider to get them to wean off cigarettes. We haven't done enough in trying that method yet. And that's why there's such a big debate over e-cigarettes, because a lot of people feel that is going to be a mechanism by which people can move away from cigarettes but still get their nicotine fix. And it's the same with the smokeless products. A lot of people who smoke probably don't want to stick anything in their mouth like that, but they may try it. The products out there, they're flavored. 5 or 6 things that are not will not adversely affect your health, but you'll get your nicotine, and you'll be able to do it in a way that's probably tapered to your needs. But everybody's different, and but we need to educate people more about these alternatives.
And we all know how well full ban goes.
Not well at all.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's you create the black. I mean, look what you were talking about the illegal counterfeit cigarettes from Vietnam. You end up creating more problems if you try to ban something. And I don't think this society today, I don't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, people are tired of having government and big business tell them what to do. They feel like they're losing control over their life to make the choices they want. And as I said, for those people who want those choices, we have to provide those choices to them in the form of alternative products that are regulated by FDA, that are technologically advanced to help cut healthcare costs and protect their health and make them better citizens.
Scott, are smoking cessation programs included? Are they covered by health insurance often, or no?
They were by the Affordable Care Act. They were included in there, and some companies do cover them.
Yeah.
I don't know the extent. I've never looked at the numbers. But the other flip side to that is there are a lot of companies who refuse to hire if you smoke.
I've heard.
They don't want people who smoke. They're a liability from the standpoint of their health care insurance.
It is all very fascinating. Scott, I really appreciate the time. Health policy consultant. He was with the American Heart Association for 25 years. What's your next step? What's near and dear to you? You just keep waging the war against this stuff.
Yeah, what my next focus is to try to get Congress and the FDA and public health authorities to start looking at these products in terms of risk and identifying which are the most deadly products, such as cigarettes at one end, and the nicotine products, the patches and gum on the other. But where do all these other products fall, and how can we ensure that we're giving truthful information to the consumer and to the public about the relative risks of these products?
Excellent stuff. Well, we wish you all the best of luck as you keep fighting it, man. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Scott Ballin. It was a great talk. I appreciate it. More French and Friends coming up.